So once again, my name is Christian Sasse. I'm the Astronomer-in-charge for iTelescope, and my co-host Leigh Moore, who is the lead developer from iTelescope. Today, it's going to be all about solar. Very exciting daytime astronomy. So just put in the chats how many of you know something about solar. In the meantime, I'm just going to launch a small poll again, because we would love to know what your level of experience with solar actually is, and then we'll get straight into it. So I'm just going to wait a second and see where it is, and then we'll explain what we actually have to offer, which is quite exciting. I'm going to wait a moment. So the level with solar telescopes, either none or you have looked through one, maybe you even have one. If you have one, please be so kind and put in the chat. I'm really curious, or we're really curious, what type of solar telescope you have. And even if you have experience, if you want to share that with us, please do so. We would love to hear from you. Here we go. Matt is there. Oh, I know my friend Matt has a Lunt 80mm. That is great. Yeah, Matt's a good friend of mine. He is absolutely exquisite eagle photographer, and I've done some things with him, actually really nice. George says a mead. Okay, Lunt 60. Okay, we've got quite a Daystar. Jens says a Daystar. That is marvelous. Great. Another Lunt 80. Oh, there are quite a few. And even a Lunt 100. Wow, you've got just a solar filter. Thank you. So there are quite a few who are experienced. I'm just going to share the poll with you so you can see. You got none, you got about 30%. Some have looked through one, medium experience, and then we have 2 experts. That is really wonderful. Thank you so much. So let me just quickly explain to you what a solar telescope is, why it is so different to a normal telescope, and why we can actually do daytime telescope. So you have to know, of course, the sun, as you know, is incredibly bright and can be very annoying to look at the sun during the day. It's about 12 trillion times as bright as the average star in the Milky Way. And the way we look at the sun is very similar to that we do with narrowband. We take a narrowband filter that you probably have used before, but it's a bit different because it's so intense, it's just so bright and it's annoying. You always say, well, there's the sun, but you try and find the sun. That's why we have this little viewfinder, which is quite useful. And that's how we actually find the sun. It's a small projection of the sun through a pinhole, and that's how we can find the sun. It's very easy to orientate. That's initially how we do it, because you really cannot look into the sun, and you know how many warnings and how dangerous it is. So the solar filter is we are looking at the H alpha of the chromosphere, or the photosphere, the chromosphere of the sun. And because it's so incredibly bright, we need to be really fine to look at the contrast. So that's the 656.28 nanometer line that we're looking at, which is, for those of you who know that's the transit of the hydrogen from the N3, from the Barlow series to the N2. That's basically what it is. But what is different with these solar telescopes is the H alpha filter is a lot more refined. It's about 100 times better than anything that you have on the telescope. So typically on the telescope, you have a 5 nanometer bandwidth. Here you're going into the so-called angstrom. That is 100 times narrower. How do we achieve that? Well, first of all, 1 angstrom is about the width of the hydrogen atom. So we're going sub-widths of the hydrogen atom. Because there's so much energy, the first thing what you have here is what we call an energy rejection filter. That basically reflects off most of the energy from the sun. If we wouldn't do that, it would get very hot inside a solar telescope. In fact, it would destroy it, or you would get such temperature gradients that you wouldn't be able to do it. So this rejection filter at the entrance is very important. And that's only a very small, tiny amount along through the width of the hydrogen alpha filter, the H alpha filter through. The main thing that goes through, and those of you who own Lunts, this is a Lunt 60mm, very, very nice telescope, by the way, is what we call an attelon. An attelon is an interference filter. It's a very fine interference filter that really filters out the very fine line of the sun, and that's at least 10 times better than what you see typically through the best hydrogen alpha lines that you use for emission nebula. And the way we tune it, because it's temperature and pressure sensitive, actually, in this case, it's made through pressure, is you have got a fine valve which you can turn in, and thereby you are actually increasing the pressure. And as you do that, you're fine-tuning this interference filter, and so fine that you can actually start seeing the contrasts and the details of the sun. And that interference filter, whatever comes out of it, can also have multiples of the frequency, and that you need to filter those out. And that's where the third filter comes in. It's called a blocking filter. And that's at the end before it goes to the eyepiece or so. So in short, it consists of three filters: the energy rejection filter, and that is the fine-tuning filter. That's the echelon filter. Then, of course, you've got your focus on there. And then finally, the blocking filter. And those three elements make up what you have in a solar telescope. Now, that's quite nice. The typical resolution that you get out of a telescope like this is about 0.7 angstrom, which is quite remarkable. But then you may have noticed when you look at the sun, it's actually not that easy. Well, first of all, it's very bright. And second of all, it very much depends on the seeing conditions. They really vary. As soon as it gets warm or so on, you get these, you get the shimmering in the air, and that's why it's not only important to have a very good solar telescope, it's also the seeing conditions, especially early in the morning. That's why many of these solar telescopes are actually very close to lakes or very stable conditions, really different to what we have at nighttime, due to the stability of the airflow. So that's a very important thing. Now, the good news is at Siding Spring, we have both. So I'm just going to share my screen now and show you what we actually have here and what we are thinking about. Okay, so 1 second. Let me just bring up the... 1 second, I've got so many windows open here. Let me just double click on this and expand this a little bit so you can see this. Okay, so this is a super duper telescope, which we have. So it is actually a normal telescope, and it has what we call those of you who have mentioned the Daystar filter, it's got a Daystar filter at the end. So this is an Explore Scientific Refractor at f7.5, as you can buy it typically. And it is very much like a normal telescope, but at the end comes the whole set of filters that I've just explained. They're only a little bit different than the Daystar filter. One thing that's remarkable about this Daystar filter, the Daystar filter is super duper precise. It's 0.4 angstrom as opposed to what I just showed you about 0.7 angstrom. That makes a huge, huge difference in contrast. It's unbelievable. And second of all, we have excellent seeing conditions here at Siding Spring, and that makes it so special what we have. So the filter alone, from those of you who know how difficult it is to manufacture such filters, costs way, way more than very expensive telescopes. And you can guess how much that is. It's a lot. And for the first time, we have actually managed to offer this remotely, this type of service. So that's a typical Ascension mount that you have on there. The solar telescope is completely remotely operable. And the nice thing is you will be able to operate this telescope all by yourself. We will offer this service in 1 hour sessions. And we're still a bit in the alpha and beta phase, but I think in about 2 to 3 weeks, we are going to be ready to launch. Just to give you some insight, the filter itself also consists of a Barlow. A Barlow just lengthens or extends the focal length of your telescope, and the true f of the telescope is just at f32, which is ideal for solar telescopes in massive detail. We think that the field of view is approximately 1/27th of the sun. Okay, so if you took a whole panel of the sun, it would take you about 27 panels to make a complete to make a complete view of that, right, of the sun. And we will offer it in 1 hour imaging. And because the data that you get of the sun is so tremendous, those of you who have done this, typically what you do is you take 30-second videos of that. And that's massive data, right? So we will offer, we will first of all give a very simple guideline of how to process these images. It's very different to what you are used to doing with your nighttime astronomy. But it's not difficult at all. So we are working on very simple instruction videos. There will be an assistant, a trained assistant, who will help you guide through take the sun as you wish. Okay, and the sun really varies a lot during the day. I would also like to give you some examples. Let me just see where they are. Let me just get back to my page there. So what does it typically look like? So this is typically, it's monochromatic, of course. All the images that you ever see of the sun this is really the H-alpha filter. But the real beauty of it comes when you put these together. And this is what we just did recently. Let me just play this for you. So you can see the level of detail we have. You see beautiful prominences. You can see the filament structures here. You can actually sort of trace the magnetic field lines here. That is what you can get from 1 hour of looking at just one particular part of the sun. And that is way, way, way better than what I would ever be able to achieve here at home, simply also because of the seeing conditions. I'll give you one more example that we just did, and that really shows the beautiful prominence here in action. So this is I mean, of the highest quality, really, what you can expect from a solar telescope, and that is really due to the seeing conditions. And I'll just play this a few times so you can really appreciate this. And what's so interesting is the solar activity at the moment is quite high. We're going towards a solar maximum. As you may know, somewhere around 2025 is a solar maximum. So already, as those of you who are getting prepared, and I know my friend Matt is getting prepared for the there's a solar eclipse coming up in Utah, right? That is an annual eclipse. And then, of course, the big one next year in 2024 is going to be very exciting. You know, if you've got your small solar telescopes, you can take a look. I think that's in April. That's going to be a major one in the States, right? So very exciting stuff going ahead. And what's really remarkable is these change really hour by hour. And we're working on a website at the moment. And I hope that answers some of your questions. So the image processing will take mainly because you're looking at, what is it typically, Leigh? I think 100, 200 gigabytes or even more, up to half a terabyte, right? If we wouldn't process
you're
them.
talking of very large data files, very, very large data files. So an hour's worth of imaging compressed is about 160 gigabytes. Yeah.
Yes, and that's just too much. So that's why we're working on a process where you will be able to, on a very fast server, you'll have access to pre-process your images, which you can then transfer, and you can, from those, which is called lucky imaging. It's just stacking these live videos with auto stacker and so on, and you can do some pre-sharpening and so on. And then you'll be able to do an animation yourself, right? As you see this one. Okay.